All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much. Good evening and welcome everyone to the Boise City Department of Arts and History Fettuccine Forum. My name is Maureen. I'm the History Programs Manager here for the Department of Arts and History. And on behalf of all my colleagues who are here tonight and who work for the department, we're all very excited to welcome you to the 20th anniversary of the Fettuccine Forum. Yeah, thank you. So since the forum's founding 20 years ago, this gathering, as many of you know, has been a staple of event of Boise, where the community can come together and along with artists and educators and politicians and historians, all of us can hear some pretty incredible stories about the history and the culture of our city. I'm just curious, by show of hands, for how many folks is this the first time you've been to the forum? All right, well, welcome. Thank you. How many of you have come to maybe about the last 5 or 10 years of the forum? Nice. Thank you for coming again. Do we have anybody who's been here since the beginning? All right. Yes. Thank you. Well, whether you're joining us for the first time or if you are a seasoned attendee to the Fettuccine Forum, thank you for supporting this event. We're also very lucky to have, and we're very glad to have the support from the Office of the Mayor, from Boise State Public Radio, from the Department of History at Boise State University. And we're excited to host Joe's Traveling Bar here tonight, providing some refreshments. Please come visit John over there behind the counter. And we're particularly excited to welcome you all to a brand new location here at Trailhead. We're going to be hosting the forum here for the remainder of the 20th anniversary season, and we especially want to thank our hosts for giving us access to this great space in downtown Boise. But like I said, the City of Boise and the Arts and History Department, we're all very fortunate to have so many community partners who help make this event, put it on with us. But truly, the success and the longevity of the Fettuccine Forum is thanks to all of you who turn out and make this whole event possible. So thank you. And we look forward to many more years of gathering and great conversations. We also encourage you to support programs like the Fettuccine Forum through a donation to the Boise City Arts and History Heritage Fund. These funds go to support a myriad of activities that we put on with the department, including programming, archival collection through the Boise City Archives, art and historical exhibitions, and an expansion of our cultural sites programs. If you're interested, you can make those donations at boiseartsandhistory.org. That's our website where you can find more information and make a donation. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I would like to remind everybody that this event is being recorded and it will become available online on our website in the coming days. And it's also a hybrid event, which means that there are folks joining us right now via Zoom. We'd like to make a special thank you and welcome to Treasure Valley YMCA, which is actually hosting viewing parties at several locations throughout the valley. And if you ever want to attend the Fettuccine Forum, but you can't make it in person, please visit our website, again, boiseartsandhistory.org for instructions on how to participate through Zoom. And for our online audience tonight, auto-generated captions are available to you all. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a button that says Live Transcript. And after you select that, hit Show Subtitles, and those captions will start to appear on your screen. There will be a moderated Q&A at the end of our presentation, so please hold your questions during the talk. For our audience members, you should all have a question card that was left on your seat. And for our participants on Zoom, there will be a link available to you during the presentation where you can write down questions. For those of you in the audience, at the end of our presentation, our history programs assistant, Caitlin, will collect all the questions that you provide, and I will relay those questions to our speaker, both the online submissions and the one in person. So tonight, the theme that's driving our 20th anniversary of the Fettuccine Forum is Let's Talk About Boise. So for years, Boise has undergone incredibly rapid growth and big changes. And our community, in many senses of that word, has expanded and diversified and changed. And all those transformations have sparked conversations about the identity of this city. Now, many people who have maybe recently moved to Boise may have preconceived notions about the history and culture and character of our community. Some are accurate, some may be inaccurate. And what we hope to accomplish with this season of the Fettuccine Forum is to look inward at some of Boise's historic people, cultures, and the factors that comprise Boise's identity, and how all of those different driving forces have shaped our community in the past and will continue to influence the future of this city. Before our presentation tonight, I would like to acknowledge the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territory of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Paiute people in the Boise Valley. Whether or not Boise is a familiar place to you, or if it's your new hometown, it's important for all of us to recognize and understand that there has been an interplay of human and environmental forces that have shaped this community for centuries, that they are still present and at work, and that they will continue to influence our common interests and the future that we envision here. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Yvette Towersap, and her presentation tonight is called Silent But Not Absent: Indian Women in Southwest Idaho in the 19th Century. Yvette has a unique background in tribal government relations, consultation, and tribal history, and her her interests include American Indian history and public history. Some of her past historical research efforts include tribal gender roles in the 19th century, the Bannock War and memory studies, 19th century tribal leadership roles, the reduction of the Fort Hall Indian Reservation to create urban communities, and a visual teaching of tribal history through 3 runway-style fashion shows. More recently, she wrote a soon-to-be-published chapter on Native public health history during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic on the Fort Hall Reservation for a book that is related to COVID-19. Yvette was born and raised on the Fort Hall Indian Reservation and is enrolled in the Shoshone-Bannock Tribes. She graduated from Idaho State University with a bachelor's in anthropology and earned her master's in environmental law. She received another master's in history from the University of Utah and is currently a graduate student at Montana State University seeking her doctorate in U.S. history, studying the history of Shoshone and Bannock people in the greater Yellowstone region. So with that, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Yvette Towersap.
Well, hello. Thank you for such a long welcome. I want to thank you all for coming and coming to listen to me talk about some of the research that I've done about Native women. This was a paper that I had written in 2013, so 10 years ago. And at that time, I was a graduate student at the University of Utah. And I believe I was in a colonial women's studies class. And so I was looking for something to write about. And you know, when you're in these history classes, you're doing a lot of reading about different countries, different histories, and it kind of made me think about my own family, my own tribe, my own community, and you know, in our classes, we were having a lot of discussion about inequity, about injustice to women. And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. I wonder if there's anything about my tribe. And I kind of started looking around. I couldn't find nothing on it. So I thought about it, and for this class, I had to do a draft prospectus. And so I started writing on it, and I thought, before I go any further, I need to go talk to my own family and some of the people that I talked to that advised me on some of the stories and the history. So I remember going to talk to, I think there was four elderly ladies. And they were always excited to talk about, oh, what are you learning about? And I kind of hesitated to talk to them about it. And I told them, I was thinking I wanted to do some research on us as women, and what was our history like. And they kind of looked at me funny, and so I kind of read to them what I wanted to look at, some of the questions that I had developed. And they sat there. And I remember all of them were sitting there, their arms crossed, their heads went down. And that's when I know they're really thinking. When they don't say nothing, they don't look at me, they're just thinking about. And I remember long pause, patiently waiting for them to think about it individually. And I didn't expect that. I did not expect such a long consideration about whether or not I should write about or research Indian women. And I kind of think now later, one of them was waiting for the other one to say, okay. And finally, one of them said, that's kind of interesting. And they kind of looked at each other. Yeah, I guess so. And that was good for me. That was good for me. I said, okay, all right. So this is what I was thinking. And so I told him that one of the first things I wanted to do was to just kind of brainstorm. And that's kind of what, we need this. And that's kind of what eventually led to my title of Silent But Not Absent. And it took a while for me to get to that title, because as I was doing the research and I started to write it up, I thought, wow. And I'll tell you about some of the research that I was able to come up with. But a lot of it hardly even talked about Indian women in so many different ways. So many different ways did they not talk about us. So I'm going to show you here. So, oops. So one of the things, and I apologize for it being so small. I didn't know it was going to be such a small display here. But one of the things was, why women? When Indian people kind of tend to do history, a lot of it's political history, treaty history, which is, of course, very important. So why women? And so this is kind of what I came up with, is we need to be aware of how our own people have contributed, how we as women, 50% of our population, how did we contribute to the history? And this is one of my first questions, was how did we as Indian women contribute to our evolving history? And specifically, how did it affect here in Boise? That turned out to be a little more challenging question. And so what I found was Native women, our history is generally not written. Big surprise? Maybe, maybe not. But I do need to make a point. I've done this presentation to a few tribal groups, and I had to make sure to make this clear. This is not intended to criticize men. Because I remember seeing one Indian guy, he very patiently sat through the entire presentation, arms crossed, little frown, little lips were just, and he sat like that the whole time. So I want to really emphasize, this is not meant to criticize men. And if that impression is given, it's not my intent here, but simply to say this is what the women did and why. And so I really do believe that for we as Indian people, we need to know our history. We Indian people need to understand our history. And so a part of it is we need to teach it to ourselves. That's my first priority, teach it to ourselves. And then we need to share it. And I really do believe that the more people who know about our tribal history, the better. And we always have this debate about what should be shared and what shouldn't be. And I always think history, generally it should be shared. But it's also important to support our inherent rights and our treaty rights. So more the political side, extremely important. But I also recognize that there is a true danger of losing our oral history if we don't share it. So, and by doing so, we're able to shape our own history. We're able to control our own history to ourselves and to outsiders. So again, I really believe in sharing to the public. I like having the discussions, as uncomfortable as sometimes it is. It's necessary. And in fact, the more uncomfortable it is, I think it's the better. So it's not that I'm trying to make you uncomfortable. It's just that when you are, you kind of start to come to more realizations that maybe you haven't thought about or recognized. So yeah. So here's my space. For this, I was focusing in on the southwestern area of Idaho, and the Indian people who lived in this area. I needed to give me some space, and I needed to give me some time of what am I going to focus on. So I don't know if you can see it, but there is a tiny little circle there. It's kind of around the Boise Valley area. And this is for where we lived. This is where what we call Siwookie. And for the Shoshone and Bannock people that lived there, that was our name for this area. So how many of you are familiar with gender studies? Oh, good. Yeah, all right. So gender studies, looks at the relationship between men and women, and knowing that gendered relationship is different for every community, every society. We create our own internal rules and expectations. And so these were some of the questions that I developed for this research was, how did Nuwa women express our agency within the historical events between 1800 and to 1870s? So give me some time. And what was the relationship between genders? How did men and women relate? And how much influence? I didn't say power, because I'm not talking about power, but how much influence did Nilwa women have? And how did Indian women express that agency within those cultural bounds? So kind of give myself a little bit of some guidelines there. And mainly it was to help me do my research because I found I needed it. So as a historian, I went to historical documents. And I used a variety of sources. Started with the historical documents. I looked to anthropological documents, and I looked at ethnographic resources, which is way more limited. But I also talked to tribal people, and I also used my knowledge of what I grew up with in my family, and just my knowledge of what was expected for men and women, for young girls, for men. So it was interesting. It's an interesting journey. And so, of course, as a historian, you got to have an argument. And it took me a while to figure out, what am I trying to argue here? And so knowing that we're talking about gender studies, looking at the relationships between men and women, so I came up with these points here. Gender relationships within our own internal traditions and cultural boundaries were dynamic. They were flexible, and they gave women options for acceptable behavior. So it was not a strict, limited, women shall do only this, men shall do only that. And so, using the terms of gender within the gender studies is the spheres of influence. And so that actually turned out to be a pretty good way of looking at the research results, as well as kind of helping me process what I was being told from the informants that I had, as well as my own knowledge. And knowing that within gender studies, we kind of look at two different portions, the private and the public, which was also very helpful, made a lot of difference. But one of the things that I really came out was this complementary relationship and between men and women. And so knowing that, I could kind of start teasing out the roles and responsibilities and expectations for men and for women. But what I found, I believe, is more equal gender contributions within our own society. More equal. It was more equal. It wasn't, and this is kind of what I kind of envisioned was non-Indian expectations for gender. When you look at gender relationships, a lot of the questions are, who's got the power? Is it men? Is it women? And so they tend to look at it like a hierarchy. And that didn't work for me. I could not always see that. And so what it seemed to me is more this kind of complementary. Occasionally, there would be times where one would kind of have more power or more authority, but it depended on the action. And then it kind of went back to equal. And I argue that women's influence in history was very indirect and very subtle. And one of the other things I found was, in terms of time, was Indian women were profoundly affected by Indian removal. By us being removed from our original territories, it affected women in ways that people had not anticipated. So that's my argument. So hopefully I'll be able to show that within a few slides. I don't know if I can. So this is kind of what I came up with. After pouring through a lot of fur trappers, diaries, trying to find those primary sources, talking to people, going through reports, it became evident that there were 4 subject areas that kind of emerged as being affected by gender studies. And so those 4 subject areas were subsistence, political and economic, social, and violence. So, based on the research that I did, and remember, I tend to look at things historically. I don't consider myself to be an anthropologist, so don't call me that. So looking at the fur trappers' journals, their writings, their diaries, looking at the overland travelers, looking at anthropological reports, looking at territorial and federal government documents and Indian histories. Clearly, there was a lot of concern, a lot of discussion about Native women and subsistence. When talking about the political and economic, there was a lot of historical evidence that kind of said, okay, well, there was, Indian women, I don't know, we'll talk about more. But this is where I started to find some differences between non-Indian sources and Native sources. What I didn't find a lot of was social activities. And where I did find some of that was in anthropological reports, but I found a lot in our own oral histories. We talked about it a lot. The violence, however, was kind of a surprise. But that was highly documented by both non-Indians and in our own tribal histories, which like I said, I was a little surprised, but then when I started to kind of pull the data together, I was like, oh, okay, I get this. So looking at subsistence, the research that I found really verified that women were in charge of the nourishment. It was our responsibility to make sure our people were fed. We were responsible for gathering the food, preparing the food, storing the food, and feeding the families. But we had a lot of resources out there. We had a whole plant-based economy industry. We knew what we were doing. We knew what to get. We knew where to get it. We knew when to get it. We knew how to get it. And it also became a matter of how to communicate that information to leadership. And I think what kind of was a little bit of a surprise to me was land, and the fact that women was more reliant on the land resources, on the land, more than expected. War was also a point that came out, and how women interacted, participated And I guess it was important for women to have that shared knowledge of geographic places. And that was not always shared. So I got a picture here of my aunt. This is my Aunt Daisy. And this is the rabbit blanket that we made. And what we were trying to show here is pre-cloth clothes. So before Indian people had been given access to cloth through blankets, through fabric, we had to produce these types of materials. And this is for one of the historical clothing shows that I did. And I wanted to show that this is how we produced our own clothes, our own household items with the goods around us. And so we made that blanket. So I thought it was a great picture of her. So I want to share that. So talking about the political and economic. And this is the part where I really think that our history has truly been political, and therefore it's been masculine. And the reason I say that is political usually kind of implies negotiations, treaties, diplomatic relations, discussions with external people. And those are responsibilities of the men. They are the ones who, in our community, in our tribe, they're the ones who are the leaders. So as I found was some of the questions where's the women's thought and input for the leadership? How do they know what concerns that women have? And so what I found was, the male is a spokesperson, and they are reaching out in the public sphere. And it turned out that the women, their time to discuss issues was not public. It was very private. And this is where I made the argument that the reason why there was nothing in the historical record was the scribe was not sitting at the internal council meetings that the leadership had with their families, with the women, because that's where the women would tell the men, well, I think this, and the women were very knowledgeable. They were extremely, they told him this is what I think. And it was a male's responsibility to listen to them. And then once they have that input from all of their people, then they go out and talk to the external. But those are not the things that are really documented. And in fact, when I was talking to people about treaty negotiations, and there was some, there's the records for what was said in the negotiations. I think that was Augur's notes for the Fort Bridger Treaty. And I want to write a paper about this, about the process of negotiation and how did Indian people negotiate. And one of the things that I found in my research was when the Indian people were brought to Fort Bridger, and back then it was Utah Territory, they didn't talk about how many days they were there. They were actually there for a long time. But if you look at the treaty records, it makes it sound like they're there for a day or two. And it's like, no, that's not true at all. And in fact, I thought I seen something that said they were there for 2 weeks. And each time they would talk, and then they would all go back and talk with their communities. And they would talk about what was being proposed. And so, but that was not in the notes, not in the notes. And my comment is, when do we get to the point just like that? Normally we don't. Normally we have to tell a story to get to a point. Normally we have to, and I do this too, go all the way around, talk about this. And yeah, there's that time this happened. And so you have to be patiently waiting for the person you're talking to, whether it's an elder, whether it's a leader, they got to get their backstory in before they finally get to the point. And so I said, when did Indians ever get to the point? Do you really think that when they were sitting there, and I guess I imagine they have constructed a shade house and they're all sitting there talking on the ground. Do you really think they got to the point when they were talking about, well, this is what we're going to give you for this treaty provision, but you're going to give up this? Do you really think that they said half an hour later, yeah, that sounds good? No, that's not. And so that's what I think happened here. The females talked with their leadership in private. And actually women, this is kind of the input that I got, was women were very knowledgeable. They knew what was going on. They observed. It might not be documented, or maybe the Indian squaw was there. Indian families were there. That's really kind of the general statement that I seen in a lot of the written records, just a general statement. But man, those women were paying attention. They were listening. And so they knew when their time to come, they let them have it. And so, and there was an interesting point here in the negotiations for trade goods with one of the traders for I guess Ross was a trapper, can't remember. But there was a point there that I noticed that when they traded, the Indians asked for a belt, a blanket, and a skillet. And I thought, now that's a good leader, because he knows what his women need and he's asking for it and not just getting a horse. So that's how I interpret it. So political and economic. And that's me and my mom, my brother, my first trip to the State House way back when. So it was political. It's kind of economics. I threw it in there. Another big point was the social and maternal. And what was our roles and expectations to help sustain our own world. And this is kind of the normal, this is where women belong. This is the expectation of women, to be a mom and take care of the home. And so what I kind of started to see, though, was discussions about marriage. I seen a lot of anthropological back and forth about how much power did Indian women have when it come to marriage? Was we forced to be married? Or was it a lot more flexible? And so what I found was a variety of things, that sometimes women had the ability to decide who they were going to be married to. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they were forced to enter into a marriage, and they did it. But I noticed that there was a lot of discussion about women who had children from non-Indians or from enemy tribes or from outside. That was interesting that for whatever reason, the original author wrote about it. And it all came together, and what it really showed is that our community, our society was very accepting of these children. We allowed them. They were a part of our families. So I thought that was interesting. But when it comes to the social life of Indian women, wow, I could not find nothing, hardly nothing in the non-Indian sources. Because they're hardworking, they're industrious, they're always doing something. That's what really all they said. And I'm like, wow, that's all they noticed. and my thought was, well, did they talk? Did they laugh? And it was when I started talking to and looking at some of the ethnographic sources that there they are, telling jokes, gossiping, playing games. They just didn't always work. They did their work and then they relaxed. They had their recreation, they had their games. And later on, women were really good card players. But that wasn't really written about. But boy, we sure talk about it. Even my mom, she'll sit there for hours and play cards. So one of the things that I found, though, was I could reinterpret some of the maternal interactions that was being presented in the historical accounts, where and especially for some of the overland travelers, you know, where they needed help to get across a river, they needed help to get to wherever they're going, and sometimes Indians helped. In fact, Indians helped them a lot. And so if they needed to cross a river, so there was comments about how both the men and women would help the wagons get across, but their interpretation of how the Indian women treated her baby, for instance, in a baby board, cradle board, and I was just like, but she's, why criticize her? She's helping you. You know, you obviously needed the help to get across the river. And now you're criticizing her for how she's handling her baby, because her comment was, oh, and this Indian woman stuck her baby in the water and the baby was squalling manfully. And I thought, but it's August. It's August here. And it was just like down the river here. And you're sweating up a storm, and this little baby's in a buckskin cradle board. Of course, baby's going to be hot. So what? So I reinterpret that as saying, wow, she's taking care of her child. But it was just a different interpretation. But yet the written interpretation made a difference. Went to imply that Indian women were not good mothers. But I looked at it as, wow, what kind of person would criticize the help you got? So I looked at it kind of in a different way. And so that was where we're in our own ethnographic studies, we talk about it, we share with it, and we bring life to our women, and that's the fun part. And there were some really good historic theses done on it. So thank you for those people back in, I think that was in the 60s. They actually went out and talked to women and documented that women actually had a life. So a little bit about violence. Nuwa women were actually very vulnerable in so many different ways. What I found was that gathering is extremely dangerous activity. That was where the majority of the kidnappings and the, I think it was captivities started, was when Indian women were getting berries, digging roots. So women had kind of a very dangerous life. Once you went away from your camp, you had to be careful. But we taught our women what to do, how to take care of yourself. And I remember my mom and dad telling me this: pay attention where you're at, know where we're going, know how we got here. And, now I see the kids on the phones playing games, and I'm like, pay attention. Look where we're at. Look, did you see how we got here? Can you get us back home? And I thought, oh my God, I'm like my mom and dad. But that's what they taught them as young girls. Know where you're at. Know where the rivers are. Know what to eat. Know how to cache food, because you might need it. And so there was a number of historical accounts of kidnappings. And there's a number of stories of where the women escaped, not always, but some of them did, and they did make it back. They traveled at night, and I'm like, oh my God, you would walk in the dark. I could not. I need a flashlight everywhere I go. But for them to come back knowing their mind map is guiding them, that was amazing. And there was a number of stories that showed that the young girls did make it home. But it also said that there were some kidnapped women from our tribe who went and kind of was forced to create a life in their captive tribe. And sometimes they chose to stay there because they had family. They ended up having children. And so, but they would help the younger Shoshone women who are newly captive. Sometimes they would help them to get back home. But that person said, I'm going to stay here with my kids. So, we as Indian women, we had our defense mechanisms. And so not only did we have to know physically how to take care of ourselves, how to get food, how to maintain our safety, how to hide, where to hide, when to hide from animals, from other outside tribes, but we had to know our geography. And I would imagine that's pretty hard to do, because we didn't have signs back then. Blackfoot River. We didn't have that at all. But we did have a lot of Indian women get kidnapped and become captives. And my instinct is to say my tribe didn't take captives. I can't totally say that. We did sometimes have a need to bring new blood into our tribe. And so sometimes our men would go out and get new wives from other tribes. I can't really say that we had slaves per se. I don't think we would call them slaves. We would just say they're there to help us. But I kind of thought, that kind of sounds like a slave. But there wasn't really a lot about my tribe that did that, but I can't say for sure we didn't. But the other part that I seen was women as being part of the war, a battle. I did find a number of sources saying that Indian women were on the sidelines. We watched the fighting, but we watched to protect our warriors, whether it was our husband, father, son, uncle. And if a member of their family went down, they would go out and pull them out, take care of them. And there was even stories of where they themselves replaced them in fighting and engaging in the battle. I seen an account of a woman who took the place of her uncle and kind of became this Indian warrior who, and our people back then, we had, we valued courage and bravery. We weren't totally kill them, kill them, kill them. We thought it was more courageous and brave to touch our enemy or to take something from them. And I know I'm doing some research in the Yellowstone area, and I've seen tribal battles described from other tribes, from our enemies, where they reported that the Shoshone warriors would kill, or the Bannocks were actually more fierce, would kill this party except for one. And we would tell that one, you go back home and you tell them that we let you live, but we killed everyone else, because we wanted people to know we are fierce people. You should fear us. So our women played a role in that. I mean, we weren't just looked at as we need protection. And I did find accounts of where running battles, where the women would be running away and the men would be coming up, protecting us, flanking us. So it was a little bit of both. But one thing I did see in the research was like pictures. And I thought about putting a picture up, and I thought, no. And you can see in the change of pictures when photography was first introduced, and they went out and started taking pictures of native groups, native people. And you can see where, and at least in my tribe, when we're in mourning, we cut our hair. You know, I've heard people cut their fingers off. People slash their legs, their arms in mourning, because they truly are having to get over the loss of that person. So you see that in the pictures. Looking at the year, look at the year of what that picture is. Look at it before. A lot of the before pictures, they're either their hair is in braids or they're long. And then when you look at the 1870s, and that's kind of where I cut my time off here, 1870s, 1880s, you see a lot of women, the hair cut right here. And some of them, you'll see pictures of Indian women with their head covered. They're not looking at you. And sometimes it's kind of hard to see those pictures, because sometimes the picture is blurred, but that's people in mourning. So those are the impacts of war. But trying to tie it to gender, when you lose one of your family members, who's taking care of you, who's speaking for you, who's feeding you, causes a shift in gender relations. If another man can come in and step and help out, that helps. But I think one of the other things that I found in war was women lost access to the land that they needed. Couldn't go there no more. Couldn't get access to that plant, that field, that meadow. And this is the other thing I really argue is, I think barbed wire is a true enemy to Indians back then, because we didn't care. And even now when we go harvest camas, oh, there's a bloom. I'm going to follow it. And I just follow the blooming camas. And that can get us in trouble, because sometimes we'll just cross the fence. That's not a good thing. We've learned that. Sometimes private lands are not marked. We don't have the right to harvest on private land. So that's where I argue barbed wire is not good for us Indian people. So some of those are just kind of summary of some of the things that women were affected by war, violence. And boy, people like to document that. That's my daughter. I told her I was going to use a picture. She's in the Navy, so that's when she was in Japan. So if she's watching, thank you, Rena. Oops. So looking at the sources for trappers, immigrants, wow, you can really see the stereotypes. You can see the misperceptions about women. It is there. I guess I was really surprised at how much it was there. Kind of misperception, stereotype by the men. Usually they were the ones who were writing. And again, I argue treaty history is masculine history. A lot of that is out there. Men writing about men. And the people who follow it are usually men, attorneys, diplomats, leadership, truly masculine history. And it's important. But okay, there's more out there. There's more out there that I found. And it's not just about political history. So when Indian women were forced to the reservations, we lost access to our favorite lands. We lost access to our nutritious favorite plants. So that affected what we could do. If women can't go and harvest, say, camas, that takes away a significant portion of their role and responsibility. And so I make the argument that we were affected way more than people expected. Women were affected by Indian removal because the Fort Hall Reservation does not have camas. It does not have bitterroot. It does not have the same soil. It does not have the same levels of water and moisture. It does not have the same altitude that we were used to. So I argue that we women were way more impacted than people realize. And again, our social life, nobody talked about it in history. So when I started doing the research, I'm like, well, there we are. There's our songs. There's our laughter. There's our jokes. And you know who we joked about the most, I found, was men. And our games, I mean, like shinny games, I seen that got really exciting. And pretty deadly at times where we're playing and we don't care if we get bloody or if we hurt each other, we're going to win. But that's kind of cool. But it shows that, gosh, we have a vibrant life. We are not what the history described us as being timid, as being diggers, as being those, gosh, there's just a whole variety of derogatory terms that are described for the Shoshone, the Bannocks. And it just, that's not us at all. But it is if you don't pay attention, if you don't see it and you don't write it, truly the power is with the person who scribes in history. So I believe that we as Indian women, our gender, which we developed ourselves, is based on our environment and is based on our changing circumstances. And I think that goes along with a lot of the historians, some who posited that we as Shoshone and Bannock, we are well known for maintaining our identity, even through changing times and changing traditions. We're still who we are. And I see that with our women. And so what was our gender relations? And this little girl here, she's going, this is from 1904. She's from Lemhi. She's going to the border school there. But we as Indian men and women, we had that complementary sphere. We worked together at times, and at times we, like I said, sometimes we had to let one or the other be the primary, but it was shifting. We had that ability where women can sometimes take the role of men, be a warrior at times, and sometimes a man had to do some of the roles of the women. That was okay. And in doing so, that all contributed to our maintenance of our identity, of our society. And that's really how I think we are. We're not one or the over the other. At least we were. I think we can have a great discussion about what is this like now in the 21st century. But so, yeah. So we Indian people, men and women, work together. Women did tend to be more private. Men were more public. No big surprise there. Our influence was very subtle. You didn't see it. But we women had a lot of influence over where we traveled, when we traveled, how long we stayed there, but not all of it. Because sometimes if the man decided we're going to go buffalo hunting, we would go. So politically, again, a good leader will have talked to the women, to his people beforehand, and then come to the table to discuss. And really, my main point is Indian women are noisy. The history now becomes noisy. It's no longer silent. We are there. And we're active. We're a true part of our community, and we're vital to that community. So I think that was trying to close it up here. Our influence was there. And this is the part I always kind of, I truly believe that women were hurt more by Indian removal because men like to hunt big game. And boy, that is important. That is a vital part of our society. But boy, they can sure talk for hours about that one that got away. And that's my point to them, is your resource can move and is fluid. And so you're not always tied to that one piece of ground like a woman is. If I could say camas tends to grow in a specific type of soil, environment, moisture. An elk will run where he runs. So, and if you look at some of the treaty language, it does protect some of our resources for women. It just was never really talked about. So this picture here was a part of my 1918 research, and it was trying to demonstrate the health history of the Fort Hall Indians. And this is where we were being encouraged to move into cabins. And so my argument was sometimes those cabins were part of the disease. And sometimes our own native housing was actually more healthier, especially considering, you had airborne disease. So that's where this picture comes from. And I don't know if you can see it, but she's playing cards. And she's got her cigarettes or her tobacco. So with that, I thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to talk about it. This picture is from our historic clothing show. Was able to get everyone together. I tried to make sure it was equal men, equal women. Age was kind of try to be equal. But yeah, so I hope I was able to share some new information with you, and I'd be more than happy to talk about it. But I think the challenge that I really want to make is that, mainly to my own people, we need to learn about this. We need to understand there's reasons why we were taught a young girl does this, a young man does that. And as we grow, as we age, this is why a young woman has to do this, and this is why a young man has to do that. And I think that sometimes with the changing in technology, sometimes some of those things can be lost. I don't want to say lost, diluted. And sometimes that's not always a good thing. But and that was one of the things I really found in doing this research, was a lot of my own upbringing just totally made sense. But I have to ask myself, did I teach my kids that? So it's kind of a test to me as well. But yeah, I hope that you learned something, and I'd be welcome to questions and having a great discussion. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your all your academic insights, which are clearly deeply personal as well. And we have a lot of great questions from both our online audience and our audience here in person. So yeah, folks, please feel free to pass your questions up to Caitlin. And I'm going to kick things off with a question from our online audience. After this research you've described tonight, what questions remain for you, or what new questions have popped up for you?
I wrote it at the end of my paper. Additional specific gender studies would insert the tribal perspective into Idaho history. And I think I didn't do that enough to actually place it into Idaho history. I think it kind of placed it indirectly. But I think we need to bring out more of the Native perspective. We need to bring out more of the women perspective specific to place more so. I think I just kind of pulled out big picture issues. But I think we need to reinforce, we need to reinforce to our own people why we have these. And some of them we may not need right now. But I think some of them we're finding we do need. Like, for instance, what is the women's role in butchering a bison? So there are some things that's going to carry. But that's kind of on us.
Thank you. I have two questions from the audience, and they kind of speak to the same topic. So I'm going to ask one after the other. The first question is, how did two spirit people fit into the gender roles you describe, or what were their roles?
That's a great question. And there's a reason why I didn't have that question in my research. I couldn't find any. That does not mean that we did not have individuals like that at all. It just means that I couldn't find it. Nobody wrote about it. If they were there, nobody noticed them. No, the writer didn't notice them. And so that was one of the questions that I had. And as I was pouring through documents, I couldn't find any. But I do think that that is truly a gender question, socially constructed. And so I think, you know, I'm sure that there was people present. I just couldn't find it. So it would be interesting though, if somebody somewhere, and again, I tend to look at history. So I think it's probably there. It just needs more research.
So speaking of your research, this next question is about the specifics of your sources. Were the historical accounts you referenced written by Indigenous persons or white people?
Both. I was able to find a lot of the non-Indian in the diaries, the fur trappers, governmental writings, the letters, the reports, but I also looked at tribal histories written by Indian people. And that was where I was like, of course, this Indian male didn't write about women. And I was really surprised. I went through the whole book and there was like 2 sentences about what Indian families and Indian women. I was like, yeah, okay, it's not totally on non-Indians. But you know, that's the great thing about being an author. It's what you want to write about. So, yeah.
One audience member asks, when will you do the historical fashion show in Boise for the public, and can Boise City help host that event?
I've been asked to do it again. I guess it's something that can be done. I think the good thing about having those historical clothing shows was a number of positive things for us in that, you know, we truly modeled the different time frames, and we documented the people in their different representation of this photo. And it was good because a lot of the people that participated are no longer with us. And those were excellent professional photos of them. So that's some of it's kind of hard because some of them are gone, but it's a good exercise. At some point, yeah, it would be good. I do think that our younger people need to wear our history. And it's truly a great visual presentation of history. So it's fun. So at some time, yeah.
So I have 4 questions from the audience that are related to the same topic. So I'm going to kind of condense them, but use the words of one particular person who says, Yvette, thank you for taking time to broaden our horizons. Is there any chance that you'll write a book in the near future so that many more people will be able to access your history, research, stories, etc.? Thank you.
Actually, I'm already published in a couple of books. As far as the bigger picture, it's down the road. You got a lot of work to do before I could do that. So I don't know, it takes a while.
Related to that question, several folks asked if you had recommendations for further reading on any of these kinds of subjects.
I do. There are some really good historians out there that have taken great methods. They utilize good methods. Excellent sources, excellent interpretations of different events. I think, and the one that really influenced me on the violence was Ned Blackhawk. Great historian. He's works at Yale now. He's Western Paiute. He comes from Nevada. So I would definitely recommend anything he writes. I know he's done some podcasts of Native history. I seen that he just got a new, bigger book out, I think in the past year or so. Definitely recommend him. Who else? In terms of multiple histories, multiple perspectives of one event, I think it was Jacoby. He was a good person that wrote about the multiple perspectives of, I should know this. Is one of the battles down south. God, I should know this. I'll have to get back. But yeah, there are some really good books. But I also think it's good to read those books that are not good. Give you some comparison. I don't think I'll give them publicly like this, but I would recommend, read a variety. Because you can definitely see that there are some that dated. And, that's not, I don't want to say totally their fault, but I mean, it's your challenge to be able to read a variety. So I encourage you, some great stuff out there.
This next question, and I should mention, we do have a lot of great questions, and I'm so sorry we won't be able to get to all of them, but we have time for a couple more. Thank you for honoring the critical role Native women played in plant-based resources. And the question is, do you offer plant foraging workshops at Fora Hall? And might you seek to create partnerships with federal, state, private landholders to access the crucial foods like camas?
So our tribe does have regular annual events. Our tribe does encourage tribal members to go to these places, continue the gathering practices, continue consuming our traditional resources. We have pretty good relationships with our federal trustees, our federal agencies. For years, we've been educating them about their responsibility on helping us access those resources. So I think for those federal and I think we could do better with the state, but we're not doing bad. We're doing better. And the Centennial Marsh, which is what the Great Camas Prairie over by Fairfield is now called. The state works pretty good with us. So it's not too bad. It could always be better. And I really don't like barbed wire fences. So I think if you want to designate, here's my property line, orange fence posts are good. It's just that barbed wire is so hard to get through.
Before our final question, we did get a submission online that says, "Hi, Mom," from Josephine.
I'm glad you girls are watching.
The final question I'll read tonight, though, is how do the understandings that you have learned influence the role of women in the Shoshone-Bannock tribe now?
I really go back to when I first talked to my elder women, and I was really surprised at how long it took and to see them really think about it. And I really think that they just did not even consider talking about women because, again, women's role was inside. And I was asking them to consider putting women's experiences, voice, actions out there. So I hope that it has helped people understand that, you know, we are 50% of our population. We do play a role, and to be more appreciative of their own family, their own elders, and if not theirs, then others, to be respectful and to practice, to practice the roles and responsibilities of men and women, and understand that it's not one or the, it's not a matter of power and authority. It's a matter of how we work together. I guess that's really what I want to emphasize. But I know earlier we were kind of talking about, this was, you know, my time frame here kind of was around 1880s. I don't know that I could totally say some of the roles and responsibilities of this time carries forward to 2023. I think there are some changes. And I don't want to say they're bad or good changes. I think the outside influence of equality for all kind of adds a bit of a different flavor to our gendered relationship, to where some things are okay to be equal. Some things are okay to have power and authority above. And I think some of the more contemporary discussions, equal pay, abortion rights, kind of bring a different flavor to some of these conversations now. You know, it would be great discussion to have. And I think it would be one of those debated, do we talk about this in public? Or do we talk about this internally? So I think that we do have, in amongst the Shoshone and Bannock community, we still have a gendered system. We still recognize and respect it. So yeah.
Yes, let's please give her one last hand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yvette, thank you again for your time and for sharing all of your work and research and all of those incredible stories. Thank you all for coming to our first of the 4-part series of the Fettuccine Forum, and we hope to see you again next month, Thursday, November 2nd, again here at Trailhead, and we'll be hosting Renee Campbell and Dr. Priscilla Wiegers, who are joining us from the University of Idaho to talk about their presentation is called The Treasure Valley's Asian Pioneers, Archaeology and History of Asian Americans in Boise and the Vicinity. So we look forward to hosting you again for that lecture. But again, with that, let's give us one more hand for Yvette. Thank you.